everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in May. I actually did really well. I read 11 or 12 books depending on if you count one of them, and I'll get to that in a second. But overall, I'm pretty sure 12 books is the most I've ever read in 1 month. So I'm very happy and impressed with myself. I mean, part of that is that I went on vacation, so I had a whole bunch of time, but also part of it is just that I didn't have class, so I also had more time. Anyway, let's get started. The first book I read this month was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I gave this 2 stars. I initially gave it 3 stars, but upon reflection, I realized that I didn't really like it. It just wasn't the book for me, and I read it because it's a BookTube favorite, so I definitely understand why people like it. It's a really cool story about 2 kind of magicians who are bound together in a competition, and this circus, this beautiful, amazing circus, is the arena for their competition. I just felt like it was very slow. It was a very slow build. You don't really start to understand the rules and limitations of the competition until almost the last quarter of the book. So it was a lot of chapters where you just get thrown into the deep end and they don't really tell you who anybody is or what anybody's doing, and you just have to figure it out. But it was every single chapter for the first half of this book, and it just really wasn't for me. I will say that the writing itself was beautiful. I love long descriptive passages, so that didn't bother me. And I believe Erin Morgenstern is coming out with another book this year. I forget what it's called, but I'm definitely going to check it out and see if it appeals to me. The next book I read this month was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. This book is kind of Kurt Vonnegut's autobiographical retelling of one of his experiences during the war, but told through the science fiction story of a fictional soldier who believes that he has been abducted by aliens and can travel through time. So I thought this was a really interesting narrative choice. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and I definitely understand why nobody's been able to describe the plot to me before, and I also understand why it's such a beloved classic. After that, I read The Raven Tower by Leckie. This book was a 3-star read, and I actually made a full-length, no spoiler review video for it, so I'm not going to go too in-depth. That was my dog, sorry, about my feelings about this book, but generally this is a really cool fantasy mystery story, a standalone book, and it's in second person, and I thought that was actually really cool. I'm sorry, my dog is demanding attention right now. This book follows a character who comes to this city that's protected by a god known as the Raven, and the Raven is losing power, and the kind of king of this city is missing. So this book kind of follows the main character as he investigates where the missing leader is and what is happening to the god, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was a little bit simple in the complexities of the mystery, but other than that, it was pretty good. So the next book is Carry On by Rowell, and not only did I love this book, this is probably one of my new favorite books of all time. I gave it 5 stars. It is absolutely perfect. I have nothing to say that's wrong with it. It follows the story of Simon Snow, who's the chosen one, as he tries to figure out how to defeat this great evil in the world of mages. He has to work with his best friend Penelope and his sworn enemy / roommate Baz, and it's just so good. It's in Rowell's novel Fangirl, which I'm planning to read this month. The main character is writing a fan fiction, and that fan fiction is this story. So this is inspired by a fictional thing that's inspired by Harry Potter. So this is definitely referential, but not in a way that I think was bad. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was still unique and original and imaginative in a lot of ways. I think I really enjoy light fantasy, so fantasy that reads fast, it's not very dense, and this is definitely that. The characters are so engaging. I really love the switching perspectives, and it's just so cute. It's so cute. There's LGBT representation in this, and it's perfect. It's perfect. I don't know what more I can say to convince you, anybody watching this, to read this book. The sequel, called Wayward Son, is coming out later this later this year, I think in September, and I saw they revealed a new cover and I just about cried. It is so good. I love this so much. The next book is where the 11-12 debate comes in, because after I finished Carry On, I was like, what do I follow that up with? And I decided to follow that up with the Midnight Sun partial draft that Stephanie Meyer published on her website like 10 years ago. So if you were a twihard like myself, you probably remember that she started writing the events of Twilight from Edward's perspective, and it got leaked, and out of spite, Stephanie Meyer was like, you know what, I don't even feel like writing it anymore, so here's half of it and enjoy. And I probably read that draft like 7 times when I was younger, and I was like, I wonder how long it is. And so I went to check, and it's 257 pages. Like, that is a book, right? That counts. That's a book. And I read it this month, so I'm gonna count it as a book. I'm not going to rate it because it's not done and it's just a draft online, so I feel like that would be weird to rate, but in my heart it is 5 stars, and I love it dearly, and I enjoyed it, and I encourage everybody to check that out. It's just like weird that it's been so long and it's never gonna be done, and I'm just always gonna be sad about it, but we have to accept other people's choices. Stephanie Meyer, I respect you, and I'm ready for the vampire craze to come back. So that's that on that. Up next is Severance by Ling Ma. This book follows a character named Candace Chen, who was working in New York when this thing called Shen fever kind of sweeps across the world. So this is kind of a post-apocalyptic story where people are basically zombies, and this book follows Candace Chen as she joins a group of other survivors, and also takes a look at her identity as a Chinese American woman. So I actually really enjoyed that. This book was 3 stars for me, if only because I didn't really feel like the climax was that exciting. It felt more like a gradual build that didn't go anywhere than a climax and then falling action. So that was the only reason. I think this was beautifully written, and I thought it was a really interesting take on an apocalypse story that kind of has to do with nostalgia and consumerism and like the grind of working. I don't know what it is, but it is so hot in my room, and the dress that I'm wearing is like full up polyester, does not breathe at all, and I'm sweating, so sorry if I look like gross. The next book I read this month was Kiss of the Highlander by Karen Marie Moning. This book follows Gwen Cassidy and Drustin McKelter, and Drustin is the laird of a Scottish clan from the early 1500s who is magically put into an eternal sleep when Gwen Cassidy accidentally awakens him while she's on vacation in Scotland. This book I gave 4 stars because I just really enjoyed all the really cheesy early 2000s references. Like at one point she says that she is not Gwen, her name is Gwen. She has Jennifer Aniston bangs, and it's just like, that's kind of funny. I also thought that the like sexual tension and romance in this was written really well after they started getting to know each other. I will say that the first time that they kind of interact, she has just fallen on top of him into like basically a cave, and he's like lying on a slab of rock, and she's lying on top of him in shorts and a tank top because she's like hiking in the modern day, and he like wakes up and kind of grabs her hips and tries to kiss her, and at this point he is still like coming out of this enchanted sleep and doesn't understand like the time changes. So in his eyes she's like dressed so scandalously because he's from like the dark ages, like the Middle Ages. So that is kind of has like a very aggressive vibe that I didn't enjoy. It does start to fade as they, you know, continue on their like little journey, and after he realizes what's happening, he does like refuse to touch her, so like aggressively like that. So that is kind of, take it with a grain of salt, but I did enjoy reading this. I do plan on reading the rest of this series. This is, I believe, the 4th one in the series, so I want to read the first 3 and then go to the second one, which is about his brother Dagus, which is a great name, just as good as Drustin. 4 stars, but on like the romance scale. And I don't know who out there who's watching this is going to read this, so I'm just going to say my suspicions were correct, and there is time travel, and I loved it. The next book I read was The Martian by Andy Weir. I adored this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was so good, and I have a lot of complaints about it. So I was complaining to my friends a lot while I was reading this, and then once I told them how much I like it, they were like, really? Because it seems like you just complained about it. And I do have some problems with it. I think that the main character... Oh, by the way, this book is about Mark Watney, an astronaut who is accidentally stranded on Mars, and the efforts that he goes through to survive. I feel like he as a character did not develop at all. He is the exact same funny, charming, happy-go-lucky guy from the first page to the last page. There's really no character arc. There was just like a story arc, and all of the other characters were also very, very one-dimensional, super flat. I will also say that the majority of this book is made up of Watney's, the main character's, like logs, kind of tracking what he's doing to survive, and it reads like somebody figured out, like did the math to figure out how they would survive on Mars and looked at it and said, I could probably fit some story into this, I think, and then wrote it. So it's basically just like logistical engineering explanation writing for most of this book, and there were parts of it where I was like, dear God, just tell me like how he's feeling. Tell me if he's sad. Tell me if he's like wishes he could have a shower. Like, you know, is he tired? Anything. But I will say this was a super, super engaging read. It was super fast. I really enjoyed it, and I haven't seen the movie, but I do want to see the movie because I feel like in the trailers, there were like clips of him being sad. So I feel like there's probably going to be a little bit more emotional depth in the movie than there is in this book. Up next, I read The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. This book follows the main character, Alice. She and her mother have kind of always been on the move, never setting down roots. And when they find out that Alice's grandmother has passed away, her mom decides that it's time for them to settle down in New York City. Alice's grandmother is the reclusive author of this book of fairy tales that has a cult following and a very devoted fan base. And these fairy tales are dark and twisted, and they're not like usual fairy tales, which makes them very, very compelling. So this book follows the story of Alice as her mother gets kidnapped, and she decides to go to her grandmother's estate, the Hazelwood, and figure out like what's going on. I didn't like this book. This book was 1 star for me. I really liked the main character, which I've read a lot of people say that they didn't like this book because they didn't think the main character was very likable, and I actually really liked that Alice was angry and frustrated and rude and, you know, intense, because I thought it was really interesting because it's not something that we often read, especially in YA. So I really liked that, but I thought the plot dragged. I thought that as much as the fairy tales were kind of involved in the story, they were very rarely explained to the reader. So these fairy tales are starting to like come to life, but we never know what the fairy tales are. They're never actually described to us, which is like really, really frustrating. I also think that a lot of like the major reveals and surprises towards the end of the book lost their emotional impact because they were during scenes that were basically dream sequences. So when every single sentence is like super weird and crazy because it's a dream, you kind of lose the impact of your major surprises if it's like in the middle of something super weird. And I thought this was just boring. I read it in a day, or 2 days, so that doesn't really sound like I thought it was boring, but I just didn't really enjoy it. I don't think I'm going to read the sequel. I've heard that Albert is working on actually writing the book of fairy tales that is in this, and I think that would be cool, and I would definitely check that out because that is, I think, the most compelling part of the story. But other than that, this just wasn't for me. The next book I read was actually a graphic novel called Stage Dreams by, what's her name? Let me check. Melanie Gillman. So Stage Dreams follows a trans woman runaway and a queer indigenous outlaw during the time of the Civil War, and it's about 100 pages long. I read it in like 30 minutes. It was also a free advanced copy from NetGalley, so that was cool, and I loved this. It was 4 stars for me. I thought it was so cute. The art style is like colored pencils and pastels and soft and sweet, and the story is so sweet. It's so sweet. The only reason it wasn't 5 stars is that because it was so short, it definitely felt like the first half of a book instead of an entire book. There wasn't really enough following the climax to make it feel like a complete and satisfying story arc. I also think it's like a standalone, so I don't think there's going to be a follow-up, and that's kind of disappointing, but it was cute and uplifting and enjoyable, and I loved it. The next book I read was Circe by Madeline Miller. This book follows the life of Circe, who is kind of Greek mythology's first witch. And I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. Marcy, what are you doing? She's the daughter of Titans, and she's super cool. She's best known from the Odyssey as one of Odysseus's trials, but I really liked this book. I give it 4 stars. I liked it more the longer and longer I got from reading it, because in the midst of reading it, I felt like it was a little slow and I didn't understand the plot, because I'm a person who really enjoys plot-driven stories that are accompanied by really strong characters, where this is definitely a character-driven story. It's about her life, it's about the encounters that she has with other people, it's about the different ways that she comes to love and experience life. And I found this really nice to read. It's so beautifully written, and she is such a well-developed character. I saw Madeline Miller speak about this book like the day I finished it, and it's impossible to not like a book more after you see her, like, the author speak about it, and I stand by that statement. You just have to like it more after. But I will say one thing about this book is that it does have themes of kind of assault and misogyny, and there's specifically one scene that's not graphic, but it is intense, where there is an assault. And it's addressed within the narrative and within Circe's life as she kind of develops and talks to people. So I would say just go into it aware of that, and other than that, I really enjoyed this book. Not to mention that Madeline Miller wrote one of my favorite books of all time, The Song of Achilles, so I will read literally anything she writes. And I didn't like this one as much as that one, but it's just like anything she writes, I'm sold. No, you don't need anything else, I'm sold. Last but not least is the book I actually finished reading yesterday, and that is Sky Without Stars by Jessica Brody and Joanne Rendell. 2 stars. This book was not my favorite to read. It is a sci-fi retelling of Les Mis, and it follows the character equivalents, not of the main character, Jean Valjean, but of Eponine, Marius, and Cosette. So their names in this book are Chatine, Marcellus, and Alouette. And just in case you don't know what Les Mis is about, it's about kind of a revolution that takes place in France. There's a lot of subplots, and it mostly follows the story of a kind of escaped prisoner as he tries to take care of this young girl and also redeem himself as an upstanding citizen, but it also follows these younger people and their relationship to a revolution. And that subplot of those younger people kind of planning and getting involved with the revolution is kind of what this story sort of follows. I thought the world that this was set in was really inventive. It's like 500 years ago, humans left Earth and repopulated this solar system called the System Divine, where there's 12 planets, and each planet was repopulated by a family, and this one is like the French planet, so there's a lot of fun French space words, and that is a really cool idea. My problem was that it was so very derivative of Les Mis. I basically knew everything that was going to happen as it was happening, kind of reinterpreted. I thought that it was going to be more like Les Mis was an inspiration, but instead it's kind of like they just put the story in space. I also hated two of the main characters. They were just so frustrating and entitled to me, and I feel like this is also the first book in the series, and I think I still want to read the second one because I'm hoping it will introduce some of my actual favorite characters from Les Mis. So I'm hoping that the main characters in this book that I like really didn't like will develop as the story goes on, but this book is already almost 600 pages. Why didn't they develop in this? That's a lot of time. That's a lot of real estate to have your characters develop. And it's not like they don't develop, but this wasn't my favorite. Let me just put it that way. I also thought the writing wasn't very subtle. It was like something would be implied and then in the very next paragraph it would just be stated outright. So there was very little that I as the reader got to like figure out for myself. And there is some stuff in here that I figured out like about 200 pages before the characters figure out, and not because I'm particularly clever, but it's because the narrative tells you and then the characters figure it out later, and that was just kind of annoying. So this book also came out like 2 months ago, so I just wasn't a huge fan, but I still think I want to continue on with the series. I'll just think about it when they even announce the second one. Alright guys, that's it. That's everything I read this month. I actually think it was a really good month. I read some stuff I liked, I read some stuff I didn't like as much, but on the whole, like, I found a new, like, almost favorite book. I want to buy my own copy. I want to buy the new one when it comes out. I'm just, like, ready. I've done nothing but think about this book for months. A single month since I've read it. But I'm hoping to continue this trend of reading a lot. I mean, that's the point of this channel. So hopefully I got my thoughts across coherently, and hopefully you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!